you got to be willing to commit to staying consistent for a long period of time, even if the results aren't following. But all the people that I know, man, that have very successful, especially when it comes to content specifically, this would be true in just about any other discipline as well, but content, writing, podcasting, YouTube, like anything like this, TikTok, the most successful people that I know, the success always came after like 500 releases.
Welcome to the podcast. Nathan Newberry here, your host. I got Travis Chappell here. Super pumped for you to listen and hear about his story. You guys are going to love what he does, which is podcasting and other businesses that he has. We're going to learn some more about that. He's a speaker. He's a father. He's a husband. He is an amazing guy. You're going to be able to hear his story even more. But before we dive into that, there is a link down below with a training I want to give you guys in the show notes here about how to build a brand. So many leaders come to me and say, hey, how do I monetize? How do I, get leads? How do I build an online company? And this is where I help you a lot with that. There's a free training with that. So check that resource out. Travis, super pumped that you're here. Here's a question that I ask everybody on the podcast, jumping in right into it, is what is high performance? What does that look like? What's that definition that is inspiring to you with high performance?
I think basically it's just the willingness and desire to compete in every area of your life. I think for a while I was kind of siloed and went into like, well, I want to do this one thing really well, but then I focus on business and I neglect my health. And when I was in that phase for a while, I told myself every story as to why it wasn't important right now and how, I'll focus on it later or whatever. When you really start truly studying people who are high performers, you realize that there's not one piece of you that you can extract from the whole, that we are people as a whole. And that involves every area of being a human, which would include physical and mental health. And if you're, you can't be a high performer if you're only focusing on one of those areas. All high performers that I know care about every one of those parts of their lives and they excel in all of them.
Yeah. Do you think that's an internal wiring, or do you think that's just something that they just had to hone in and build?
I'm not sure it's internal wiring. I think it can be caught and taught, that probably some people have more of an inclination to be high performers. They're competitive by nature, or they're more competitive genetically, or, their sibling situation growing up made them be that way or something. So I think there's some people that are kind of inherently just high performers, but I've also seen a lot of people in my life completely change that about themselves and go from somebody who was maybe raised in an environment that didn't encourage them to be competitive, didn't encourage them to be high performers. And then they got out into the real world and started realizing the benefits that come with doing those things and started changing a lot of their daily decisions and habits to become that person. So, I think it's kind of both of those things. I've interviewed a ton of really successful people. There's not really any core common denominator that ties them all together as far as like a personality or, one particular upbringing. It's a slew of different people, different backgrounds, different culture, different context.
Yeah.
And all of those things. So I think that, it probably varies from person to person.
I feel like it's piggybacked off of some shortcoming or challenge that someone had to face. A death, an illness, some travesty that was piggyback off of like the drive and success of somewhat failure with like an obsession and tenacity for more and higher achievement.
Yeah, they certainly seem to be correlated for sure. Yeah. Especially if you look at the high performers of the high performers, if we're talking like the 0.01%, not just the top 1%, that seems to be true with a lot of those people, that there was a moment that created some sort of a chip on their shoulder, whether it's, being dealt an unfair hand in life in general, or being told all the time they couldn't do something, or having terrible grades in school and having the education system tell them they were never going to be anything. Like there was something that happened that put a massive chip on their shoulder to go prove everybody wrong. That there definitely seems to be some correlation there.
Let me ask you this. You're a husband, you're a father, you're a speaker, you have a business you're about exiting. but your main focus, outside of just coaching on podcasts, but you have a podcast and you're creating another podcast. And just for context, you're almost at 1,000 episodes. Like that's a
Yeah.
big thing. You've been doing this for a while. Tell us how you serve clients. How do you work with people now?
Yeah, man. So I've for a while was just figuring out how to make money online, and the only way I knew how to do that was to share my knowledge. So I kind of got forced into podcast coaching when I first started because the podcast started going pretty well, and I was trying to become a full-time podcaster, but didn't realize how difficult it was to build sponsorship revenue and like how big of an audience you needed to be able to do that. So I initially just started offering, coaching off the back end of that, and started working with people, teaching them how to run podcasts. And that kind of turned into its own business where we did podcast coaching, consulting. I had a course business for a while, Podcast Profit Academy, they were running. We had a 30-day launch course. We had a bunch of different materials on how to launch, grow, run, and monetize a successful podcast. And then along the way, I stopped doing that when we started the software in the agency that we have, Guestio, which is the one that we're leaving right now. So recently in my calendar, I was just like, you know what? I miss having coaching clients. I miss helping people with the podcasting thing. So
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I'll instead of doing like the courses, the one-to-many, like I'm not trying to turn it into a massive business at this point. But I do like working with clients one-on-one. So I have taken a couple of podcast coaching clients, typically, somebody who's already running a really successful business who just wants to get started with online media or wants to grow their personal brand or wants to do high level business development with potential clients in their space. There's a lot of different reasons that people want to start a show. And it's my job just to come in and help them make sure that we set off a good strategy to make sure that those things are actually going to happen. People tend to invest heavily into like equipment and stuff like that when they start a podcast. And in my view, it's like you got to invest in the knowledge first, the equipment's secondary. So that's what we help with in the coaching program.
Talk to me about the business strategy overall, and then I want to get into your story of like why you did this, because I think this is a practical thing, and I want people to hear this at the beginning here. Is how important is building a podcast to create a business? Because there's different avenues. Like I can, run ads, I could do like daily content, I could do this. How important have you seen plugging a podcast funnel or system into your business that's just helped you skyrocket and connect with the right people?
Sure. It just really depends on what you want to accomplish overall, right? So if you have a e-commerce business, like a product-based business that requires you to sell move volume, like real units, probably starting a podcast isn't going to do much for you at the very beginning, unless you use it as a way to build better partnerships with manufacturers or to decrease costs out of something that's going to help you scale, or build partnerships with affiliates who are going to sell your product, or influencers who you can do campaigns with. There's still a lot of ways to build relationships and help your e-com business, but especially for like high ticket, high trust businesses that require you to have good relationships with people, like financial planning or fractional CFO stuff, or marketing agencies, really any agency work, your ability to connect with as many people as you can, talking about the main problems that you solve, will inevitably help you, will lead you to more business. And at that point, it's just a matter of how many conversations can you have with those people. And if you are doing a daily show like you're doing, or what my Travis Makes Money podcast is doing, you talk to 365 people on an annual basis about these problems, it's going to lead to business. Yeah. The problem is when people turn it into like their main source of lead gen, and then the genuine relationship building part falls away because people can just sniff out that you're just trying to make a quick buck off of them. And when you positioned it as, I want to have you on my show, and then all you're doing is like pitching them the whole time, like that's not a really great look. Wow. But if you look at it as just a relationship building tool, and then during the conversation, you just make people aware of what it is that you do, some people are going to have that problem that you happen to solve, and you can use it as a way to bring real business into your company. But the thing that I really, really like about it is that it also has unlimited upside potential on the back end. Like it's the only form of marketing that also helps you in your future business, whether it's this business or 3 businesses down the road in 20 years from now. Like the relationships that you create and the audience that you build will be yours forever. And there's not really a lot of other places that allow you to do that. Like if you run an ad, you're going to have to run another ad.
Right.
If you're scaling exclusively through paid, you're going to have to continue to buy ads to make it work. Even all the best ad buyers that I know are people who are trying to move their audience to more organic methods, because those become real audiences over time. So the nice thing about having the podcast is that it kind of checks off some of these boxes in the meantime, right? Like it helps you build your knowledge base. It helps you be better at what you do. It helps you build your communication ability, helps you ask better questions, helps you have conversations with people from a cold start, which is a really valuable skill in today's world. There's a lot of other reasons to have it, in addition to building fantastic connections and relationships. But then again, that back end piece, the cherry on top, is that while you're doing these things, you're basically getting paid to also do one of the best things that you can do for your future, which is build an audience of people who actually care about what it is that you have to say over some period of time.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. I think people miss that long-term play of marketing, of building an organic platform, right? Like just like having people interview, having like making it an arm and discipline. Like I was coaching someone that's just starting and they have the hardest time like posting. There's a discipline, there's a muscle, and podcast is so important, but I think it's helpful because it's forced, right? Because you're not going to not have a conversation that's in front of you, for one, right? And then the other part about it is just trying to get like in that momentum of growth. And you've built your audience, this way. And I think there's a trust aspect that podcasts and then other just consistent content helps.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. You got to keep jumping on the mic, and the audience that you just can't pay attention to the numbers. People get discouraged. They look at the numbers 6 months in and they're like, I'm not Joe Rogan yet. It's like, yeah, duh. It's going to take some time. But like I said, if you focus on all the other benefits you get along with doing it, that's why my podcast has done well, is just because I just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And I keep improving at it over time. So it just continues to improve along with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there wasn't a magical time. There wasn't a magical moment where it skyrocketed. There was no hockey stick level growth. It's just stacking slowly but surely over a long period of time. But the bottom line is I would do it even if the numbers weren't getting better. I would do it even if I weren't getting paid to do it, because I still find all the other benefits to be well worth the investment that I put into it.
Because so many people, like, I guess we should ask you this, like, you've seen podcasts start. And I think like there's so many like podcasters that don't even get past like episode 7, let alone ever go over 100, right? And you're almost at that
90%, like 90% don't make it past the 10 episodes.
Crazy. Well, tell me, bring us back to the moment so people get some context of your story a little bit. Like, you've been an entrepreneur, like bring us back to that very beginning of understanding you're wired a little bit different. You pursued things that's different than the most of the norm. Like, bring us back to that very beginning of maybe even the line in the sand moment that really kind of helped you push toward what you're doing now with all the success.
Yeah, I was raised fundamentalist Baptist. So a lot of cult-like tendencies that I was raised with, very much in a bubble. Graduated from an unaccredited Bible college with a Bible degree. Thought I was going to be in ministry my whole life. And the college I graduated from is on the same campus that my church was growing up, which is also the same campus I graduated kindergarten from. So kindergarten all the way through senior year of college, I went to this one place, which also was where my church was. And so coming out of that, I thought I was going to be in ministry. Quickly realized that like I did not want to do that. That wasn't the path for me. And then was just kind of like, I don't know what to do. I have an unaccredited Bible degree and no other skills other than like preaching. So at the time in college, I was doing door-to-door sales to make extra cash in college and was pretty good at that. And so I just did 100% commission door-to-door sales for several years after college, figuring out that, hey, this sales thing is something that allows me to have flexibility in my schedule while also be able to make some good money. And then after a couple of good years of door-to-door in my early 20s, I was married at 21 to my high school sweetheart. So when I realized I didn't want to be in ministry, and then I clocked in a 6-figure year doing door to door, I also realized I didn't want to do door to door forever.
Mm.
So now I was kind of like in this position as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old with a mortgage and a wife, where I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. And I was looking at everything at that point, bro. Like, I looked at FBI applications, I looked at the fire department, I looked at entrepreneurship, real estate, all these different paths. And ultimately, like, business just kind of kept tugging at me.
Mm.
And that was the first time I discovered podcasts. I was just like looking to consume whatever information I could possibly consume to teach me the things that I didn't know, and came across a few podcasts that I liked, started consuming their content regularly. And then eventually was like, I mean, this is a cool way that people make money, apparently. So let me take a stab at this. It kind of gives me the ability to communicate, which, I've been preaching on stage since I was 12 years old, being in front of people and stuff. So that's something that not a lot of people do. So, this kind of gives me the ability to leverage some sort of a skill set that I have, improve on that skill set, but also potentially be able just to talk to people for a living. That sounds kind of fun.
Right.
But again, didn't realize the heavy lift it was going to be on how to actually monetize the show. So that was a whole nother learning curve. But then, every step from that point forward was just solving to figure out how to continue to do this thing online so that I could continue to support my habit of podcasting.
Yeah. How old were you when you started that?
The podcast? 17. I was 24.
So
when I
24-year-old.
launched.
And then,
But that was like 3 weeks before I turned 25, though. So basically 25.
25. I mean, that's really young, early age to focus on that. I mean, even in the time where not many people were doing podcasts, and podcasts now are kind of like taking shape where a lot of people are doing it now more than ever, which is very interesting that you saw the foresight of that way back in the day.
Yeah, I was just lucky to have the right exposure, man. It was just getting exposed to podcasts early on when a lot of people weren't listening to them, and then just becoming a fan of the medium.
Yeah.
And then was just like, oh, sure, let me try my hand at this thing. Let's see how that goes.
How was the shift from focusing on ministry to then doing that? Because you're married at the time, your wife just expects, hey, now I'm going to be a pastor's wife or something. And then all of a sudden you're not. And now you're, in business and you're accelerating, your business and growth, and it's different trajectory in a playing field. And then you move from LA to Vegas, like a lot changed with your wife being on board with all those things.
Oh, totally. And to say it wasn't a strain would be just a straight up lie. There was a bunch of conversations that we had. It was a tough time for a long period of time. I knew that nobody in my life would agree with any of the decisions that I was making, so I largely just kept it to myself. And I frankly just got lucky that I had a wife who was willing to hear me out and listen to what I was, saying along the way. But she grew up the same way that I did, very, cultish background, fundamentalist Baptist. We started dating senior year of high school, and then went to all the college together and got married right before we graduated college. So yeah, she was definitely like, oh, I'm going to be a pastor's wife, a youth pastor's wife, or something like that. And then I kind of just flipped the script on her. So yeah, all credit to her for being not just willing to adapt and to change, but also to support me every time I did something crazy that she had no idea how it was going to work out. Like, even she was like, a podcast, what is that exactly? And how are you going to make money doing that? What's going on? But like I said, luckily she always believed that I would figure it out and just supported whatever I felt like whatever I felt like I needed to be doing.
How did that transition then into, building a business, a coaching company? How did that evolve?
That was just out of necessity. It was like I was still doing door to door for the first year plus of my podcast, because as podcast isn't making any money at first, especially because I didn't have a business or anything on the back end that I was using it as a lead gen tool for. I was doing something called the ask method, which is essentially picking a niche, building an audience around a topic, and then spending time with that audience as you get to know them and asking them essentially, what are the problems that you're running into when it comes to this thing that I talk about all the time, which for me was like networking and building better business relationships. So I would jump on free phone calls with anybody in my audience who was willing to schedule a phone call, and I would have a conversation with them and just say, hey, what's the biggest thing you're struggling with when it comes to this thing? And I would keep note of that, and then eventually just started launching my own products and services off the back end of the show that were solving the problems that my audience was telling me they were having, which was a much, much different sales experience coming from like cold door to door where nobody even wants you there to like moving into a warm audience with somebody who's listened to me for hours on end, has a problem, told me what that problem was, and then I created a solution to that problem. It was like order taking, not sales, which was a massive, change for me.
It's definitely a big shift in sales for that.
Yeah, it was just the only way I knew how to how do I stop knocking doors and get somehow full time into doing this thing online was like the only focus. So it was a massive pay cut at first. I went from, making, I don't know, 10 to 20,000 a month doing door to door, selling products, 100% commission, to 3,500 a month doing podcasting and coaching full time. But I just knew that's what I wanted to do. So we cut like all lifestyle expenses. We broke the lease on this beautiful home we had here in Vegas and moved in with my brother-in-law in a 2-bedroom apartment with me, my wife, my 2 dogs. But it cut our living expenses from, our rent plus utilities at that spot was like $3,200 a month or something. And then we moved it down to $500 a month when we moved in with my brother-in-law for a few months while I was trying to figure it out and hack it. So I think that was one thing that we were always willing to do, is just cut lifestyle expenses and focus on creating income in a space that I actually wanted to be spending my time in. So it gave me the freedom, the flexibility to be able to do that when I was just getting started. So that was the path for me. It just kind of was, I got to figure out how to make some money doing this. This, coaching thing is something people are asking me for. So I may as well fill that gap and figure out how to bring in some more clients that way.
Yeah. How long was the turnaround until you got back to 10 to 20K a month?
Let's see, the first year, my first full-time year in podcasting was 2019. And we did close to $500,000 that year. So not very long.
Turnaround. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. A year.
Yeah.
Cause like we did almost $500,000, but the bulk of that, probably $250,000 to $300,000 of that came in the last quarter of 2019. So maybe about a full year after I did it full time, went back to good money.
Yeah. And then you built a business on top of podcasting.
Yes. So from that point, I was reinvesting. I was getting into courses. So we built our course business up to $50K a month. And then right around that time, we had a travel mastermind called Cool People, Cool Places. We were supposed to take people all over the world to different retreats and business talk and stuff like that. And 2020 happened. And it shut down that whole mastermind side of the business and freed up a ton of time. So that's when I started working on the software. The software company was right around COVID. So pulled out of once we finished that round of funding, we raised like about $1 million for that. Once we finished that round of funding, I was like, I can't keep splitting my focus between like courses and coaching and consulting and all these other things and masterminds when I like have this single goal of the software. So that was around the time where I was just like, all right, let's focus on this now.
Yeah. Let me ask you some questions around podcasts. What are the major reasons why people fail when they're thinking about doing a podcast and then trying to do it long term? Because they hear success like you have, like I have with using this. Like they hear this, but then they ignore it, or they never start it, or they never do it. What's the major challenges or roadblocks that you find that people have when they want to start or succeed in it?
I think the fear of embarrassment is one of the ones at the top. Podcasting is unique in the fact that you can't do it in silence. Like you can't, it's not like building a side hustle that involves you, mowing lawns in your neighborhood or whatever. Like you can do that without anybody looking at it, without drawing any attention to yourself or anything like that. When you launch a podcast, it's public.
Yeah.
So you're like really putting yourself out there in a big way. And so I think the fear of failure, the fear of embarrassment on that prevents a lot of people from doing it. It also prevents a lot of people from continuing to do it. Like if they do this big public thing and then 6 months later, it's still not getting any traction, they're just like, well, screw this. You know what I mean? They can't handle the low numbers for extended periods of time. It just is like too discouraging. So they just don't do it anymore. there's a little bit of cost associated with doing it unless you're going to be an editor. So that's another thing probably for people who are like really barely scraping by. And they have a full-time job. They don't have a ton of time. So like they dedicate their time to doing interviews, and then they all of a sudden find themselves having to edit those things and figure out how to write show notes and then put it in a media host and then distribute the thing. And then they don't have any time to market the show. So then they go try to outsource the editing, and then it's costing them $600-700 a month to produce their show, which they don't really have. And then it doesn't pick up. They can't figure out how to monetize, so they just let it go. So there's potentially the cost might prevent some people from doing it. The fear of embarrassment might prevent some people from doing it. But ultimately it just comes down to me, it's a matter of asking yourself the question, again, would I do this for free? If the answer is no to that question, it's not impossible to do it. Like it's not like I've known some people who've had tremendous success in their first 100 episodes. Most people that I know who are successful though, it took them a lot longer than 100 episodes to get where they wanted to go. So the people that are doing it, that are looking for that success short term, the window is so small, man. It's just there's no guaranteed way to make it happen on that short time frame, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like you're leaving a lot up to luck. So if that's your strategy, just understand that you're probably going to be done within a year. So what I tell people is like, if I'm going to work with somebody one-on-one, I want a soft commitment from them, like at least a verbal commitment that you're going to do this for at least 3 years. Because there's so many obstacles along the way that are going to prevent you from wanting to continue to do this for 3 years. Because sometimes it's not fun. And I had plenty of moments along the way where I felt like I really wanted to quit. But it's just the people who outlast everybody else who end up building the audiences. Now you can't just be consistent. You have to be consistently improving as well. But consistency is it's the barrier to entry. Like the only way to guarantee you're not going to get more downloads next month is to not release any episodes. So that consistency for most people is a bummer. But all it is really is systemizing, putting a system in place to make sure that you're consistently putting in that effort. Once you like have a batched or bank of episodes that's getting you to 4 to 6 weeks out, it's fairly simple to stay on top of continuing to make sure that you're producing enough content to stay releasing. You just got to make that commitment.
I love what you said about outworking. There's a quote from Patrick Bet-David that I have listed on my desk. And he says, outwork, out improve, outlast, out strategize. And I love that because I think that that's what it takes with the resolve and focus to do a good job. Like I think so many times people, because we've been nurtured to be comfortable, we have this short-sighted thing about like quick dopamine hits. So if like after you do a few episodes, it doesn't work, okay, I'll try something different. And they just never gave it enough time to actually do it. And if it's like you have the resolve, like you're saying, it just go as far and long as it can until it happens. And so 3 years, that's amazing.
And realize that, again, even if you get that viral moment to happen, the one that you've been waiting for that's going to put you on the map, it's not going to put you on the map. It just does. Like, it's not the same as like going viral was in like 2008 when there was just a limited amount of content that was out there, and going viral could, quite literally bring you a ton of attention for a long period of time. Now it's like people go viral every day. Every day people are going viral. I've had several of my clips go viral. Like what it does for actual audience building long-term is very, very, very small. So a lot of people also have this idea where it's like, well, if I get this one guest to say yes, that'll be it. And then they work hard and they have that as their North Star and they put in 8 months of work and then they finally get that one guest to say yes. And they think like, this is it. I've made it.
Right.
That guest accepts some collaboration post on Instagram. They promote the episode. They do everything you wanted them to do. And it goes well for a week and a half. And then all of a sudden it's back to crickets. And it's like, yeah, that's part of it. So people get really discouraged when they have this like North Star accomplishment that they think will solve all their problems, and then it doesn't. Then they're like, okay, well, screw this. This isn't worth it, and they throw in the towel at that very moment. So, it's you got to be willing to commit to staying consistent for a long period of time. even if the results aren't following. But all the people that I know, man, that have very successful, especially when it comes to content specifically, this would be true in just about any other discipline as well. But content, writing, podcasting, YouTube, like anything like this, TikTok, the most successful people that I know, the success always came after like 500 releases. You know what I mean? Like if you look at someone like Evan Carmichael, who I think has 3+ million subscribers on YouTube, he has a chart somewhere, and you can Google it, throw it in the show notes or something, of his growth over time on YouTube. It took him like 6 years to get to his first 15,000 subscribers or something like that. And then another year and a half to finally reach 100,000. But then it was like another year before he hit 500,000, and then like 6 months to hit 1,000,000. You know what I mean? Like it was just like it stacked over time, but it took years to get that initial traction. Another buddy, Sean Cannell, was the same way. Big YouTube guy. It took him years to get to his first 100,000 subscribers. My buddy Chris Van Vliet, who's one of the top sports podcasters in Spotify, was on YouTube for a decade before he got any real recognition for his channel, was able to like actually jump into it and create his own stuff and get paid for it. And now he's massive in that world. So, it's just a matter of like, I know that even if it takes me another decade to reach the goals that I have for myself in the space, I just don't see that it's not worth putting in that time to do it, because I enjoy it in the meantime. I get a lot of great benefits from doing the show that don't have anything to do with the monetary aspect. And ultimately, I still think that a great version of life, if you fast forward the clock, is to like do fantastic conversations with really interesting people and get paid a lot of money to do it. So as long as that's something that I believe to be true, which I still do, then it's something that I'm going to continue to work toward in the meantime.
Yeah. What are the keys for success? What's the strategy that wins for podcasts that you've seen?
If you would have asked me this 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said like, go find the best people that you can and interview them. And I still believe in that strategy a lot. But I've also seen other people that have come up in the space since I've been running my show who have done well without doing that. So I'm not sure it's a one size fits all thing. There's plenty of ways to skin a cat, so to speak. But what I've seen really work from the entertainment space recently is more people who sit into a character or a version of themselves. Like they're almost always in a bit. That seems to work for a lot of these like solo shows, even some of the guest interviews, like Bobby Altoff soared into fame and recognition from her podcast right off the bat after she interviewed Drake. But she built this persona as being this super like kind of dry, unimpressed, sarcastic interviewer, which was juxtaposed with the level of the famous people that she was interviewing. So she kind of used that bit to gain celebrity. Caleb Priestley from Barstool Sports, I think he actually just left Barstool, but he was the same way with the Sunday Conversations. He kind of settled into this bit as being this eccentric, crazy interviewer that was really funny, built a great name for himself in that space. Zach Justice, who I've had on my shows, has the Dropouts podcast with his buddy Jared. That's one of the ones that I look at that I'm like, okay, well, they did a really great job at creating audience around them and their friend group. And people came to look for them. And so when they got guests, it just those episodes did better because it was bringing in audience from that guest, right? Like a Matt Rife or a Neil deGrasse Tyson that they had on. But they also were just extremely successful because people would still tune in just to hear them, the co-hosts, just talking on a solo episode without a guest. So I've seen several examples that kind of debunked my idea of like, you got to just go find the best people and interview them. Alex Hormozi is another example, does an interview on his show, but it's one of the top business podcasts in all of iTunes because he got really well known for talking about business. I used to say guests, but really it's a matter of sticking in the game long enough to find the path that's going to work best for you. It's going to be different for everybody. But if you're starting from scratch and have for me, it was like I was 24. And I didn't really have much figured out about life. In fact, a lot of my things that I thought I had figured out were completely up in the air by that point in my life. So for me, the interviews were a way to provide better content when I didn't feel super qualified to talk about anything from an authoritative standpoint. And so interviews can really help fill that gap when you're kind of in the position that I was in, starting from scratch, not really knowing anything, not being confident in your ability to display more information to people who are listening to the show. So they help fill the gap, but they also help you grow the show because more people know about it just by the fact that you're interviewing people. They want to also promote the episode so they can promote it to whatever audience they have. Even if it's small, it's still, gaining audience from other people. It helps you to be able to collaborate more. So I like the interviews thing long term, just because of all the added benefits of having people on your show and what that does for your relationships and your network and things along the way. But like if I was doing a solo show, I would have quit a long time ago. Half the reason I have my show is just because it gives me an excuse to connect with people that would normally never give me any time in their day. But now I can use the podcast in order to be able to do that. So I wish I had a better answer for that. Like I said, if you would have asked me a few years ago, I would have been much more clear about what I thought was the strategy. But I've seen a lot of strategies, I've seen a lot of people come in and do exactly what I just said and it not work at all. And I've seen people come in and do the solo show thing, never take on a guest, and it works really well. So, it's a matter of just continuing to throw more spaghetti at the wall and finding out what sticks for you.
Yeah.
Because there's not a one size fits all. If there were, then the people with all the budgets would be the ones with all the biggest shows. And that's not, we've seen that's not the case. There's plenty of, A-list celebrity podcasters that have come and gone since I started a show. They got a ton of money from some network to build a big show that they thought was going to do really well because they had an A-lister behind it, but it just didn't ever do well. And it just, that format, whatever, something didn't work about it. And instead of trying to figure it out, that talent was just nah, I don't really need this. And they bounced. Whereas you have, like I said, the Bobby Altoffs, or you have the Alex Coopers, who's, Call Her Daddy host, who've jumped in for little to no budget at all, and then have become super famous off of it. So, there's everywhere in between on that spectrum. And it's difficult to say that one size fits all because I just don't believe that's the case anymore.
Yeah. Man, I can ask you a ton of different tactical questions because I think it's so important for people to do nowadays. If they have a tact for communicating and want to be in relationships and connection with people. But how can people follow you and connect with you further?
Yeah, whatever podcast app you're listening to this on right now, just search Travis Makes Money or Travis Makes Friends. Admittedly, Travis Makes Friends will not be relaunched until Q2 of 2025. So depending on when you're listening to this, it might not be out yet, but Travis Makes Money definitely is. So you can search whatever podcast app you're listening in and check out my shows.
Awesome. I'll put all those links down below. Thank you guys for listening. Again, make sure to check out that resource to grow your brand and resource. Go follow Travis Chappell online, and you guys are going to find some great resources. He's everywhere as well to connect with him on social media or on podcasts. Make sure to connect with him. And again, thank you for joining us on this episode, and we will see you on the next one.